The monster in the shadows. A cold, dark planet floated in the farthest corner of the galaxy. It was called the Void. No stars lit its sky, and no life dared to thrive on its barren surface. Among space travelers, it was whispered about in fear. They called it cursed. They called it haunted. But most of all, they spoke of the monster that lived there. No one who ventured close ever returned to tell the tale. Ethan Blake's small cargo ship stumbled into this eerie world by accident. A routine supply run had turned into a nightmare when a meteor storm tore through his ship, forcing an emergency landing on the Void. Now, Ethan stood on the planet's harsh, cracked surface, staring at his damaged ship with dread. Smoke billowed from the engine, and the blinking red lights on his control panel told him the grim truth. He wasn't going anywhere without repairs. He was stranded. Ethan was a skilled mechanic, used to fixing things under pressure. But here, something was different. The silence was too heavy. The air felt charged with something unseen. Even the ground seemed to hum faintly, as if the planet itself was alive. He set to work, searching for salvageable parts. Every step he took echoed unnaturally loud in the emptiness. The sound of his own breathing seemed deafening. And then he felt it, a strange sensation, like being watched. He froze, scanning the desolate horizon. Nothing moved. No shadows shifted. Yet the feeling remained, gnawing at the back of his mind. "Pull yourself together, Ethan," he muttered, shaking his head. "There's nothing out here but rocks and bad luck." But deep down, he wasn't so sure. Hours passed as he worked tirelessly on his ship. The tools in his hands felt heavier than usual, and his nerves were stretched thin. Then, as he adjusted a loose panel, a shadow flickered in the corner of his eye. He spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there, just the endless, gray wasteland. He tried to convince himself it was his imagination, but the nagging sense of unease wouldn't leave. Ethan decided to take a break. He sat on a rock near the ship, his back to the lifeless expanse. Pulling out a protein bar, he took a bite, his eyes scanning the horizon again. And that's when he saw it. Far off in the distance, a figure stood. It wasn't human. It was tall, too tall. Its shape was distorted, almost mechanical, with jagged edges and glowing red eyes that pierced through the dimness like twin beacons. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring at him. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His first instinct was to run, but where? The ship wasn't ready, and there was nowhere to hide. Instead, he sat frozen, hoping the creature wouldn't notice him. But it was too late. It had already seen him. The figure began to move, its steps slow and deliberate. The ground seemed to tremble with every step it took. Ethan scrambled to his feet, dropping the protein bar. His mind raced. Should he fight? Should he beg for mercy? He had no weapons, no plan. All he had was the overwhelming urge to survive. The creature stopped about 20 feet away, its towering form now fully visible. It was even more terrifying up close. Its body was a strange mix of flesh and machinery, with wires snaking through its limbs and metal plating covering parts of its torso. The glowing red eyes seemed to bore into Ethan's soul. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. Then, the creature spoke. "Why are you here?" Its voice was deep, mechanical, yet strangely human. Ethan's mouth went dry. He struggled to find his voice. I crashed," he stammered. "I didn't mean to come here." The creature tilted its head, as if studying him. "You shouldn't be here," it said. "Leave." "I can't," Ethan blurted out. "My ship is broken. I'm trying to fix it." The creature's eyes narrowed, the glow intensifying. For a moment, Ethan thought it might attack him. But instead, it let out a low, growling sound, something between a sigh and a laugh. "You won't survive long enough to fix it," the creature said. "This planet is not kind to outsiders." Ethan's fear was now mixed with confusion. The creature wasn't attacking him, But it didn't seem friendly either. He took a cautious step forward. "Who? What are you?" he asked. The creature didn't answer right away. It simply stared at him, as if deciding whether or not to speak. Finally, it said, "You may call me Varric, and if you want to live, you'll do as I say." Before Ethan could respond, Varric turned and began walking away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. Ethan stood there, his mind racing. What had just happened? Was Varric truly a monster, or was there more to him than the terrifying rumors suggested? One thing was certain. Ethan's time on the Void was going to be anything but ordinary. The first encounter. The night on the Void was an unbearable kind of darkness. Ethan Blake sat in his makeshift shelter, the damaged ship looming behind him like a fallen beast. His flashlight flickered weakly, barely pushing back the shadows. Every sound, every gust of wind or scrape of shifting rocks, felt amplified in the oppressive silence. Sleep was impossible. How could anyone sleep when something was out there, watching? He hadn't seen the creature again since it disappeared into the shadows, but its warning echoed in his mind. You won't survive long enough to fix it. Was it a threat or a grim truth? Either way, Ethan knew his options were limited. He needed parts, tools, anything to get the ship working again. Sitting still meant death. By morning, or what passed for morning on this sunless planet, Ethan made his decision. He would venture out into the Void, even if it meant facing that thing again. As he walked, the desolation of the planet became more unnerving. Jagged rocks jutted from the cracked ground like the teeth of some ancient predator. Strange, metallic debris littered the landscape, remnants of ships, or something else, that had come before him. The air had an unnatural chill, and the faint hum in the ground seemed to grow louder the further he went. After hours of searching, Ethan stumbled upon a massive wreck, half buried in the dirt. It was an old cargo freighter, its hull torn open like a tin can. But more importantly, it had parts he could use. Ethan climbed into the wreckage, his heart pounding. The inside was eerily intact, with corridors that stretched into darkness. He scavenged quickly, pulling wires and components, stuffing them into his bag. But as he worked, he felt it again. That sensation of being watched. He froze, listening. At first, there was only silence. Then, faintly, he heard it, a soft, metallic scraping sound, like claws against steel. "Hello," Ethan called out, his voice echoing down the corridor. His flashlight swept the area, but nothing moved. He shook his head, cursing his paranoia, and turned back to his work. That's when the sound came again, louder this time. Closer. Ethan spun around, flashlight trembling in his hand. At the far end of the corridor, something moved. A figure stepped into the beam of light, tall, hulking, its eyes glowing a piercing red. It was him, the creature, Varric. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go. He was trapped in the wreckage with this thing. Varric didn't charge or attack. He simply stood there, his mechanical body half hidden in the shadows, watching. "What do you want?" Ethan demanded, his voice shaky but defiant. Varric tilted his head, the gesture almost curious. "You're persistent," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Most would have fled by now." "I don't have a choice," Ethan shot back. "I'm not dying here." Varric stepped closer, the sound of his heavy, metallic footsteps echoing in the corridor. "And yet, here you are, in a place you don't belong. Do you even know what this planet is?" Ethan swallowed hard, gripping his flashlight tighter. "I don't care what it is. I just need to fix my ship and get out of here." Varric's red eyes seemed to narrow, as if studying him. "You think this place will let you leave?" he asked. "The Void takes what it wants. It doesn't let go." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Well, I'm not giving it a choice." For a moment, Varric was silent. Then, to Ethan's surprise, the creature laughed. a low, rasping sound that echoed through the wreckage. Brave. Foolish, but brave. Ethan didn't know what to make of it. The monster everyone feared, the one that no one dared to approach, was now standing before him, laughing. It was unsettling, but also strangely human. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter now. Varric's laughter faded, replaced by a solemn tone. "I'm not helping you," he said. "Not yet, but you intrigue me, human. Perhaps you'll survive longer than the others." "Others?" Ethan's stomach tightened. "What others?" Varric didn't answer. Instead, he turned and began walking away, his movements slow but deliberate. "Follow me," he said over his shoulder. Ethan hesitated. Every part of him screamed to stay behind, to return to the relative safety of his broken ship. But curiosity and desperation pushed him forward. If this creature had answers, he needed them. As he followed Varric into the heart of the void, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far bigger and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The unlikely ally. Ethan Blake trudged through the lifeless wasteland, following the towering figure of Varric. The creature moved with an unsettling grace, its mechanical limbs hissing softly with each step. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to piece everything together. Who, or what, was Varric? And why hadn't it killed him yet? The silence between them was suffocating, broken only by the crunch of rocks beneath their feet. Finally, Ethan couldn't hold it in any longer. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Varric didn't turn to face him. "To a place that will help you survive," he replied, his tone flat but firm. "If you're smart enough to listen." Ethan frowned. "I'm not sure I trust you." Varric stopped abruptly and turned his glowing red eyes on Ethan. For a moment, Ethan thought he saw something behind the mechanical menace, something almost human. "Trust is a luxury you can't afford here," Varric said coldly. "But if it makes you feel better, you're not the first human I've helped." That stopped Ethan in his tracks. Wait, what? There were others. Varric didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned and kept walking. "Ask fewer questions," he said. "You might live longer." Ethan scowled but followed. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but where else could he go? The ship was a lost cause without parts, and he didn't fancy waiting around to see what else might be lurking on the void. After what felt like hours, they reached a strange structure rising from the ground like a jagged wound. It was partially buried, its surface covered in alien symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. It looked ancient, yet somehow alive, humming with a low rhythmic pulse. "What is this place?" Ethan asked, staring at the towering structure. "A remnant of those who made me," Varric said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "They called themselves the Zenari. To you, they would be gods of science and cruelty." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "They made you." Varric nodded, his red eyes fixed on the structure. "They built me to be their weapon, a fusion of flesh and machine. But they abandoned this world long ago, leaving their mistakes behind." He gestured toward the structure. "This is one of their labs. If you want to fix your ship, the technology inside might help." Ethan hesitated. "And what's the catch?" "There's always a catch." Varric turned to him, the glow in his eyes dimming slightly. "The Zenari didn't just create me. They created others. Not all of us were abandoned. Some stayed behind, twisted by rage and madness. They won't welcome you." "Great," Ethan muttered. "Killer machines, just what I needed." Varric didn't smile, but there was a flicker of amusement in his voice. "Stay close to me, human. I'll keep you alive, if you don't slow me down." The entrance to the lab was a jagged opening, as though something had clawed its way out long ago. Inside, the air was thick and cold, and the faint glow of alien lights illuminated the strange angular hallways. The walls pulsed faintly, as though the structure itself was alive. Ethan followed Varric cautiously, his eyes darting to every shadow. The hum of the lab grew louder as they went deeper, and the air seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Varric paused, his mechanical hand brushing against the wall as though lost in thought. "Because you're not like the others. They came here for greed, for power. You came to survive. And survival. I understand." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the honesty in Varric's voice. Before he could respond, a low growl echoed through the corridor, sending shivers down his spine. "What was that?" Ethan whispered, gripping his flashlight tightly. "Trouble," Varric said simply. He stepped forward, his body tensing like a coiled spring. "Stay behind me." The growl grew louder, and suddenly, a creature emerged from the shadows. It was grotesque, a warped fusion of flesh and metal, with jagged limbs and glowing eyes. Its movements were erratic, almost glitchy, as though it were a machine on the verge of collapse. Varric didn't hesitate. With a roar, he charged at the creature, his mechanical arms slamming into it with a force that shook the walls. Ethan watched in awe and terror as the two mechanical titans clashed. Sparks flew, and the sound of tearing metal echoed through the corridor. It was over in seconds. Varric stood victorious, the mangled remains of the creature at his feet. He turned to Ethan, his red eyes glowing brightly. "This is why you don't trust this place." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. Noted. As they moved deeper into the lab, Ethan couldn't help but feel a strange sense of connection to Varric. The monster wasn't just a machine. It wasn't just a creature. It was something more, a survivor, like him, and in this desolate, hostile world, that might be enough. The secret of the void. The lab's core was unlike anything Ethan had ever imagined. Massive, intricate machinery pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. The walls seemed alive, shifting subtly, as though the entire structure was breathing. The hum of alien technology was now a deep, rhythmic thrum that vibrated through Ethan's chest. "This place," Ethan murmured, staring in awe. "It's like it's alive." Varric's mechanical frame stood still, his glowing red eyes scanning the room. Alive? No, but aware. The Zenari built their technology to think, adapt, and evolve. Even in their absence, it endures. Ethan stepped closer to a towering console. Strange symbols and glowing lines ran across its surface, forming patterns that seemed to shift as he watched. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "What were they doing here?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Varric didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed a large, clawed hand on one of the walls. A faint glow spread from his touch, and the room came to life. Screens flickered on, showing diagrams, data streams, and images Ethan couldn't comprehend. One screen showed a creature, a biomechanical hybrid, its body twisted and monstrous. Ethan felt a chill when he realized it wasn't unlike Varric. "They called this place the Forge," Varric said finally. "A lab where the Zenari created weapons, not just machines or soldiers, but living weapons. They combined organic matter with their advanced technology, pushing the limits of life itself." Ethan swallowed hard, his gaze locked on the images. "So, you were made here?" Varric nodded. "I was one of their early experiments, a prototype. They wanted a creature that could think, adapt, and fight like no other. But I wasn't perfect, and in their eyes, imperfection is failure." Ethan's stomach turned. And the others, the ones still here. Varric's red eyes dimmed slightly. They were perfected, stronger, faster, more obedient. But when the Zenari abandoned this place, their creations were left behind. Over time, the creatures became unstable. Now they're nothing more than beasts, driven by rage and hunger. Ethan felt a wave of unease. And we're walking right into their territory. Varric turned to him, his mechanical body casting a long shadow in the glowing light. "If you want to fix your ship, the answers are here. but those answers come with risk. Before Ethan could respond, a soft clicking sound echoed through the room. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, sharper, until it felt like it was coming from all around them. Varric tensed, his clawed hand curling into a fist. "They're here," he said grimly. Ethan's heart pounded. "What do we do?" Varric stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You stay close. Do exactly as I say. And whatever happens, don't stop moving." The clicking grew louder, and from the shadows emerged a creature unlike any Ethan had seen. It was massive, its body a horrifying blend of muscle and metal, with limbs that ended in razor-sharp blades. Its glowing eyes locked onto them, and it let out a low, guttural growl. Ethan froze, but Varric didn't hesitate. With a roar, he lunged at the creature, his mechanical arms colliding with its bladed limbs in a shower of sparks. The two combatants clashed with terrifying force, their movements a blur of speed and power. "Move!" Varric shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Ethan snapped out of his trance and darted toward the console, his hands shaking as he rummaged through the alien equipment. He didn't know what he was looking for, but Varric's earlier words echoed in his mind. The answers are here. As he searched, the battle raged behind him. Varric fought with a precision and ferocity that was almost mesmerizing, but the creature was relentless, its attacks faster and more unpredictable with every strike. Ethan's fingers brushed against something, a small, glowing orb embedded in the console. It pulsed with a soft light, and the symbols around it seemed to react to his touch. "What is this?" Ethan muttered, pulling it free. The moment the orb left the console, the room's hum grew louder, and the lights intensified. The creature attacking Varric froze for a split second, its glowing eyes flickering. Varric took the opportunity, delivering a devastating blow that sent it crashing into the wall. He turned to Ethan, his red eyes blazing. "You found it. Good. Now run." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. Clutching the orb, he followed Varric as they sprinted through the twisting corridors of the lab. Behind them, the clicking sounds grew louder, joined by guttural roars, and the pounding of mechanical limbs against the floor. "What is this thing?" Ethan shouted as they ran. "It's the key," Varric replied. "To what, I don't know. But it's what the Zaneri were protecting. And now, it's our way out." Ethan didn't like the sound of that, but he didn't have time to argue. As they reached the exit, Varric turned and slammed his mechanical fist against the wall, causing part of the structure to collapse behind them. The pursuing creatures let out furious howls, but they didn't follow. Outside, Ethan doubled over, gasping for air. The orb in his hand pulsed softly, its glow illuminating Varric's grim expression. "This isn't over," Varric said, his voice low. "The void doesn't let its secrets go easily. Whatever you've taken, it will come for it." Ethan looked down at the orb, its light reflecting in his wide eyes. For the first time, he realized just how deep he'd been pulled into this nightmare. Whatever this was, it was far more than just survival now. The hunt begins. The silence that followed their escape from the lab was oppressive, almost suffocating. The distant howls of the creatures still echoed in the air, like a lingering mourning. Ethan's chest heaved as he took in the scene before him. The vast, desolate landscape of the void stretched out endlessly, its jagged terrain casting long shadows in the dim light. The orb in his hand seemed to hum with an energy all its own, its glow faint but constant. Varric stood beside him, his posture rigid, his glowing red eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting danger to leap from the shadows at any moment. He didn't seem tired, but Ethan could feel the tension radiating off him. The battle in the lab had taken its toll. They had barely escaped, and now they were out in the open, vulnerable. "You can't keep running forever," Varric said, breaking the silence. His voice was cold, but there was something deeper in it now, something almost resigned. Ethan didn't need to ask what Varric meant. The creatures were still out there, and they weren't the only threat. The Zenari might have abandoned this place, but their legacy lived on in the twisted horrors that roamed the void. Ethan felt like a pawn in a game he didn't understand, with the pieces moving around him faster than he could react. "We need to keep moving," Ethan said, his voice firm, though uncertainty lingered beneath the surface. Varric nodded, his mechanical limbs clicking as he adjusted his stance. "Agreed. But if you're serious about fixing your ship, there's more you need to understand. The orb you hold is not just a key. It's a map, an ancient blueprint to the Zenari's most powerful creation." Ethan stared at the orb, the weight of Varric's words sinking in. A creation. What kind of creation? Varric's eyes dimmed, a shadow crossing his face. A weapon unlike any the galaxy has ever seen. It was the Zenari's ultimate project. If they had succeeded, the universe would have fallen to their will. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. So what happened? Why didn't they finish it? "They made a mistake," Varric said quietly. "They thought they could control it, but it was too powerful, too unpredictable. So they abandoned it, left it hidden, buried beneath the void. The orb you hold is the key to finding it, but it also means the end of us." Ethan swallowed hard. "The end of us. Anyone who comes close to the weapon," Varric's voice was cold as ice, "will be hunted down. The creatures that roam this planet are not just mindless beasts. They're part of a system designed to protect the weapon, and they won't stop until it's safe." "Safe from who?" Ethan asked, his mind racing. "And what are we supposed to do about it?" Varric's gaze turned sharp, his red eyes flashing with intensity. "We survive. We find the weapon before they do, and we make sure it stays buried. Because if they get their hands on it, everything is lost." The words hung in the air between them, thick with gravity. Ethan didn't fully understand what he was about to get involved in. But one thing was clear: the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about stopping a force that could destroy everything. But first, they had to survive the hunt. Without another word, Varric began to move, leading Ethan through the jagged landscape. They kept to the shadows, moving as quietly as possible. Every so often, Varric would pause, his senses alert, listening for any sign of movement. The creatures that hunted this place were relentless, but they weren't the only danger lurking. The landscape itself seemed to conspire against them. The ground shifted unnaturally, as though it was alive, always threatening to collapse or swallow them whole. There were times when the distant screeches of the beasts reached their ears, followed by the sound of something massive stomping through the landscape. "We're close," Varric said after what felt like hours of navigating the labyrinthine terrain. Ethan glanced around, still unsure of the exact location. Close to what? Varric's expression darkened. The entrance to the Zenari's secret vault, the weapon's resting place. But it won't be easy to reach. It's guarded by more than just the creatures. Ethan's hand gripped the orb tighter. The glow from it was brighter now, as if reacting to the presence of something nearby. Varric's sudden pause confirmed his suspicion. A low growl vibrated through the ground. "They're here," Varric muttered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He didn't need to say more. Ethan knew exactly what was coming. The ground beneath them seemed to shift, and then, from behind a craggy rock formation, emerged the creatures. They were different this time, more evolved, faster, and more intelligent. Their glowing eyes locked onto Ethan and Varric, and with a horrifying screech, they charged. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the creatures closed in. His hands instinctively reached for anything he could use as a weapon, but there was nothing. The only defense he had was his wits, and the strange alliance he now shared with the terrifying being at his side. Varric stepped forward, his mechanical body lighting up with an unnatural glow. His claws extended, ready for combat, but he turned to Ethan for a moment. "Run," Varric shouted. Ethan didn't hesitate. He turned on his heel and sprinted, the sound of battle echoing behind him. He could hear Varric's roars and the crunch of metal against flesh, but he didn't dare look back. They were outnumbered and outmatched, But the mission wasn't over. The hunt had just begun. Sacrifice and redemption. The ground shook beneath Ethan's feet as he ran, his heart pounding with terror and adrenaline. The creatures were close behind, their growls growing louder with every step. The air was thick with tension, the heavy silence of the void shattered by the sounds of pursuit. But Ethan couldn't stop, not yet. He had to trust Varric. He had to believe that the creature, the monster everyone feared, would come through for him. But even as he sprinted through the jagged landscape, he could hear Varric's voice, commanding, relentless. Keep running. Don't look back. Ethan didn't dare disobey. He pushed himself harder, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his legs burning with the effort. But despite the distance he put between himself and the pursuing creatures, he knew it wouldn't be enough. They were faster. They were relentless. And they were hunting him. Then, in the distance, he saw it. The entrance to the Zenari vault, a massive stone doorway, barely visible against the jagged rock face. It was ancient, but the technology within had withstood the passage of time, hidden from those who sought it. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He was so close. But as he neared the entrance, the ground rumbled again. This time, it wasn't just the creatures. Something far worse was coming. Varric's voice crackled through his earpiece, strained and urgent. Ethan, get to the vault. I'll hold them off. Ethan's chest tightened. What are you talking about? We have to go together. I'll buy you time. Varric snapped. Don't argue. You have to finish this. Get inside the vault. You're the only one who can stop it. Before Ethan could respond, a massive shape lunged from the shadows. The creature's glowing red eyes locked onto him, its jaws snapping with a terrifying ferocity. But Varric was there, throwing himself into the creature's path with a violent roar. The force of their collision sent a shockwave through the air, but Varric didn't flinch. He was more than a match for these beasts. He was their equal, but even he couldn't hold them off forever. Ethan hesitated for only a moment, his mind racing. He wanted to help, to fight alongside Varric, but there was no time. The vault, the weapon, everything depended on him getting to it. With one final look at the battle unfolding behind him, Ethan charged toward the entrance. The vault's massive doors were adorned with strange, pulsating symbols that seemed to shift as he approached. The orb in his hand flared to life, casting an eerie glow across the stone surface. He stepped forward, and the doors opened with a low, rumbling groan. Inside, the air was thick with ancient power. The walls were covered in strange, glowing inscriptions that seemed to pulse with energy. At the center of the room stood an altar, surrounded by pillars of stone. And on that altar lay the weapon, a massive crystalline structure, pulsing with a light that seemed to call to him. Ethan approached it slowly, reverently. But as his hand reached out to touch the crystal, a familiar voice echoed in his mind. You don't know what you're doing, human. Ethan's heart stopped. It was Varric's voice, but it sounded different, distant, like it was coming from another time or place. He turned around, but there was no sign of Varric, only the weapon, its light growing brighter with each passing second. Varric? Ethan called out, panic rising in his chest. What's happening? The voice returned, this time filled with urgency. The weapon is alive. It was never meant to be controlled. It will consume you, just as it consumed them. You must stop it before it's too late. Ethan's pulse quickened. The weight of what Varric was saying crashed over him. The weapon wasn't just a tool. It was a living, breathing entity. And if it fell into the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. But just as the realization struck him, the ground shook again. The creatures were closing in. Varric's final words echoed in his mind. Destroy it, or let it destroy you. With a trembling hand, Ethan reached for the weapon. The moment his fingers touched the crystalline surface, a shock of energy coursed through his body, filling him with a burning heat that threatened to tear him apart. The weapon's power was overwhelming, its pulse beating in time with his heart. He gasped, stumbling back as the energy surged. The weapon was alive. It was calling to him, its mind connecting with his in ways he couldn't understand. Images flashed before his eyes, visions of destruction, of entire worlds consumed by this power. And then he heard it, the sound of Varric's voice one last time. "You must choose, human, the weapon or your life." Ethan's head spun as the weight of his decision hit him. The power of the weapon was irresistible, but at what cost? It would grant him the strength to control the creatures, to wield unimaginable power. But that wasn't what he wanted. He couldn't become what the Zenari had intended. Another puppet, another tool of destruction. With a final, desperate cry, Ethan pulled his hand away from the crystal. The weapon roared in fury, its energy surging violently, as if it had been denied its rightful master. Ethan stumbled back, his body burning with the aftershocks of the energy. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. For a moment, everything was still. The weapon, the vault, the creatures outside. It all seemed frozen in time. And then, in the quiet, Ethan heard a voice. Soft, faint, but unmistakable. "Varric." "You did it," Varric's voice whispered, full of pride and sorrow. "You made the right choice." The creatures outside roared in fury, but they were no longer a threat. The weapon's power had been contained, and the void's hold on Ethan was broken. Varric's final sacrifice had bought him time, but it had cost him everything. Ethan stood, wiping the sweat from his brow, his mind reeling from everything that had just happened. He knew one thing for certain now. The void had no mercy. But in the end, it wasn't the weapon that had decided their fate, it was the choices they made. And in the face of unimaginable power, Ethan had chosen to live. But Varric had chosen to give everything for a chance at redemption. The legacy of the monster. Ethan stood in the heart of the vault, the heavy doors of the ancient Zenari structure now closed behind him. His mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, relief, sorrow, and disbelief. The power of the weapon had been sealed, but at what cost? Varric, the creature everyone feared, had sacrificed everything to give Ethan the time he needed to make the final choice. Ethan's hand still gripped the orb, now dimmed, its glow faint against the backdrop of the vault's cold, sterile walls. The weapon was no longer a threat, but the victory felt hollow. Varric had been the one to save them, the one who had understood what the weapon truly was, what it could become. And now, Varric was gone. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to feel the weight of his loss. He had seen Varric not just as a monstrous machine, but as a warrior, someone who had been cast aside and forgotten by those who made him. But in the end, Varric had shown him the true meaning of sacrifice. He wasn't just a monster. He was a hero, misunderstood by the galaxy that feared him. Ethan's chest tightened as he turned towards the exit of the vault. The creatures had stopped their pursuit, their shrieks fading into the distance. The void had fallen silent, but there was still so much to do. He had promised to honor Varric's sacrifice. He had to finish what they started. As he stepped into the eerie silence of the barren landscape once more, Ethan's thoughts turned to the future. He couldn't return to the life he knew before. Too much had changed. The weapon was locked away, but the knowledge it contained, the technology, was something that would reshape the galaxy. There was no going back. The wind howled as Ethan began to walk, the weight of his journey settling in his bones. He would return home, but not as the same man. He would share the truth of what had happened on the void, telling the stories of the monster who had saved him. Varric had been more than a weapon. He had been a living being, a soul who had sacrificed himself for the greater good. The journey back to civilization was long, and the path ahead was uncertain. But Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never forget the creature who had shown him what it meant to fight for something greater than oneself. The galaxy would learn the truth, not just about Varric, but about all the forgotten heroes like him. Ethan's message to the galaxy would be simple, but powerful. We are all more than the labels we are given. We are defined by our choices, not our pasts. As he made his way toward the distant stars, the wind tugging at his clothes, Ethan looked up at the darkened sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the void, Varric's legacy would live on. Not as a monster, but as a hero. And in that quiet moment, Ethan whispered a promise to the winds. "I won't let you be forgotten. Varric, your story will be told." The stars blinked above him, silent witnesses to the end of one journey and the beginning of another.